Good morning. Today is our last class day together before the exam. So we're going to start out by talking about the exam. I talked about some of it Monday, so if you're watching this, know that the first part of the exam discussion was on Monday. This is the second part. We'll cover the high points today. And any questions, I say all the questions, I've been asking for questions this morning, haven't gotten any. Any questions about the exam, I'm going to answer after I'm done talking about the exam. So feel free to put your questions in the chat room if you have them, but I'll open it up for questions when I'm done going through the exam. So first off, I have a question on learning catalytics. It will remain open for a few minutes. There is a practice exam quiz, a practice exam 1 quiz. It's in My Accounting Lab, and we'll talk about it in a moment. Is it required? And the answer is yes, it does count as a quiz, and we'll talk about that upcoming. And again, this question is open, so if you're just joining us, you still have time to get logged in and answer the question. So that's there, but we're going to talk about the exam. The exam is next week. We do not have class next week. Your job next week is to take the exam. So how to study for the exam. So we'll start with that. The practice exam is in My Accounting Lab. It counts as a quiz. You have a maximum of 5 attempts to take it. Your score will be the average of your 5 attempts. One of the best ways to study for the exam is to work through the practice exam, to actually take the time, work through the problems. I have included the Help Me Solve This on the practice exam. There's an Ask My Instructor button there too, so you have the aids to help you work on the practice exam. It's like this. The practice exam is it's pooled, so every time you take it, it'll be a little bit different, but virtually all, very, very, very much of your exam comes from the practice exam. So if you can work through the practice exam and work through it more than once and do well, then you should not be surprised on the exam. However, don't take the practice exam once and say, oh, I'm ready. Because remember, it's pooled, and the exam is pulling from a pool, and you want to make sure that you are prepared for the exam. Now, the practice exam, you can take it up to 5 times. It counts as a quiz. Your average is your score. The practice exam can be one of your drops. So if you don't score as well on it as you would like, you get 3 drop quizzes during the semester. Those can be any class day. If you miss a class, it can be the practice exam. So that's eligible to be dropped as well. I would use the practice exam. If you take the time, work through the practice exam, then we'll talk about some other ways. Okay, study plan is next. So let's say I take the practice exam, and the first time I take the practice exam, I use all the aids, I use my notes, I go through it, and I do okay. But I had to rely on all those items to get me through it. Now on the exam, you're not going to have the Help Me Solve This aids, clearly not the Ask My Instructor and things like that. So what I would do is after I took the practice exam once or twice, I would go into Study Plan. And Study Plan is another button in My Accounting Lab. And Study Plan is a larger population than the exam. It's going to give you more multiple choice. It's going to give you more problems. And in Study Plan, I have put in Blackboard I've put a really short video on how to get into Study Plan. When you first go into Study Plan, it says quiz me, and it brings up random questions for you, which are fine if you want to do that, but to do a more methodical, to say, oh, I need help with chapter 2, or I want to do these homework problems over, that I put up a short video that tells you how to get into Study Plan where it lists all the items in it, and you can actually practice specific things. Rather, you can see everything in it and you can practice what you want to practice rather than relying on a random draw each time. So study plan does not impact the calculation of your grade. So study plan, entirely optional. It's a button in My Accounting Lab. It's there for practice. The best way to prepare for these exams is practicing the material. You want to practice it. If you look at it, or if you watch me do it, it'll look easy until you go to do it, and there'll be some little thing that practicing will help learn it. So you've got the practice exam. You've got study plan, review your notes and PowerPoints. Remember that I'm assuming you've read the textbook. Research shows if you read the chapters one time and you read them well, reading the chapters again and again is not likely to help you gain a whole lot of knowledge, assuming you've read them thoroughly once. But review your notes. Remember the PowerPoints that I have out there provide a lot more detail, so it's almost like crib notes in a way. So those are available to be reviewed. But don't just review the problems. You actually have to practice them. Okay, so practice exam is one of the best tools you have. Make sure, I would save my last 1 or 2 attempts. You get 5 attempts on the practice exam. I would save my last attempt to be able to try it without any notes other than the exam reference sheet. And then that would give me an idea of how I would do on the exam. Of course, it's random draw, so the more times you do the practice exam and really work through it. I have people in the past who have taken the practice exam and scored 30% on the practice exam and done it 5 times, and then taken the exam and scored 25 or 30%. And that would be what I expect. Actually, if you take the practice exam and score 70 or 80%, I'm going to expect your exam score to be a little bit lower than that because you don't have all the same resources in the exam situation, and usually there's a little bit of nervousness there. So do use that practice exam wisely. It is there for you to prepare for the exam and to give you some comfort to know what to expect. When you see the practice exam, it should be similar in scope. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, the question is, what if you get 100% on your first attempt? Okay, remember, I would keep taking the practice exam. The average on your practice exam quiz, remember you have quizzes every day in class, and you have the 3 practice exam quizzes and, of course, intro quiz. So I'm not sure how many that turns out to be, but missing a couple questions on 1 of 5 attempts, I think I would rather practice to be prepared for the exam because the exam is a much bigger impact. I would rather do it, but you can switch, obviously, to study plan, but I would not let the possibility of missing a few points on the second attempt. I would still do it again. Okay, so practice exam counts as a quiz, 5 attempts maximum, score is average, take it more than once, work through the problems, don't just guess. And I know that I know time is of a premium, and I understand that, and I know I'm asking for time. This class is challenging. I fully expect we will have several people get 100% on the exam. I know it's doable, but I also know that we're going to have people in here get less than 50%. And usually I can predict those ahead of time. And you're not a bad person, but usually what I see is people don't have enough time to prepare and just go into it thinking, oh, I'll wing it, or I looked at the practice exam and it should be okay. Really, you've got to practice for this class, and that's the key, is practicing. Okay, there is no time limit on the practice exam. You can open it, leave it open for a couple days while you work on it, no problem. The exam itself does have a 120-minute time limit. And the study aids to help me solve this, etc., are on the practice exam, not on the real exam. When you take the practice exam, you take it, 3 or 4 times or whatever you do. I mean, hopefully you'll take it 5 times. But if you're feeling really comfortable, I've seen people get 100% on the exam after taking the practice exam once or twice, too. So it just depends on your other study habits and what you've done up to this point. So the study aids are on the practice exam, but the real exam is going to look and feel just like the practice exam, other than, it's pools of questions that'll be looking the same as the real exams in My Accounting Lab. So that practice exam is designed to take a lot of the anxiety away. You know what to expect. I'm giving you a practice exam. Before, last year was the first year I did practice exams. Before that, I had study plan, and I said, just go into study plan and practice, and that wasn't structured enough. I'm giving the practice exam so that you know what to expect. You have a pretty good idea. If you've worked through the practice exams, nothing on the exam should be a surprise. Okay, on Blackboard, I have put the exam rules and how to prepare for the exam. We've talked about that today and Monday, but they're reinforced there. You can see that. Do the practice exam until you know the content. Usually the practice exam scores are highly correlated with your exam score. That's assuming that you're not using the Help Me Solve This to work through every problem, because you're not going to have that on the real exam. Okay, now reminder, the ending time in My Accounting Lab is not the ending time of the exam. You have to start the exam by 4 p.m. on Wednesday. And that's just a limitation because I have to allow people to get extra time, adequate time to finish within their rules. So that's why we start by 4 p.m. Okay. Okay, you need a photo ID regardless of where you take the exam. It has to be your flashline ID or driver's license, state issued, passport, etc. Okay, now this is important. One of the big takeaways today, if during your exam there is any issue, do not rely on the proctor to contact me. So let's say it doesn't matter if you're in the lab or proctor you, the same situation applies. First of all, know that that exam is much more important to you than to the proctor. Whose grade is it? It's yours, right? It's way more important to you than to that proctor. So the proctor may not have a sense of urgency. The proctor, it may slip the proctor's mind, or it might be 24 hours till I hear from the proctor, or I may never hear from the proctor. If there is any issue during your exam, I need to hear about it right after you finish the exam. You're not to be emailing during the exam, but if there's a problem starting the exam, I want to hear from you. I want to hear from you. My job, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, is to be I am monitoring email, and I'm monitoring it closely. That said, probably not between 10 p.m. and 5:30 a.m. Okay, so I'm not a night owl by any means. But during, from about 6 or 7 a.m. until about 10 p.m., I am watching my email like a hawk. So I am monitoring it. So if there's an issue, you email me. So let's say there was a misunderstanding and something happened. You need to email me right after you're done with that exam. I need to hear from you. You also need to check your email fairly regularly after you email me for a response. Sometimes what's happened, someone will email me and then won't check their email for 2 days. And I'm doing my best to get back to you. During the exam period, you will probably get an auto reply from me, giving you the phone number for ProctorU, giving you the contact for My Accounting Lab tech support. And I just do that so you have that if you need it, but I'm going to get back to you. I put up the auto response just to have those there so you get pretty instant feedback there, but I will get back to you. That is my job during those 3 exam days, to just watch and get back to you if there's any issue at all. So I am going to be watching. If you don't, give me a couple hours, because it's possible I could have a meeting or something. But if you don't hear from me within a few hours on those 3 days, that's time to email me. Or, in the middle of the night, give me till the morning. Okay, so email me. It is your responsibility to email me. I do not want to hear, well, the proctor said they would contact you. That's fine. The proctor can contact me, but I need to hear from you if there's anything that went wrong. Okay, so, and everybody's been pretty good about doing that in the last year. Procrastination, and this, I'm going to sound like your mom, and I can't help it. Don't wait till the last day to take the exam. Especially don't wait for the last few hours. Here's the scenario. All the sections have to start by 4 p.m. Wednesday. If you're taking it in the lab, if you're in sections 1 or 2, how do you know what section you're in? Well, first of all, you're going to get an email from me telling you where you're going to take your exam. But secondly, if you log into Flashline, it'll tell you what section you're in under your schedule of class. Anyways, so if you're in sections 1 and 2 and you wait for the last day, specifically the last few hours, then lots of people put it off, and I understand that as well. But what happens then is you're stressed because it's the last minute. You're waiting in line. You can't get in because you have to wait in line. And then this just sets up a whole stressful situation that you don't want. Also, do not, you know how I told you on Monday the exam takes most people about 45 minutes? Allow yourself plenty of time. By plenty of time, at least 2 hours. The exam, you have 2 hours to take it. You might have to wait in line. So leave yourself plenty of time. Do not schedule yourself so tightly. I cannot tell you how stressful it must be to go in to take an exam and only have an hour because you've got to get to work and you're going to be late, and then something happens and it doesn't work. So give yourself a little bit of extra time. Make at least 2 hours for it. And then when you get into the exam, maybe it's one of those times that you go blank and you need a few minutes to take a deep breath and get to it. So don't rush. This is the one time where you need to allow yourself the time. So that's sections 1 and 2. Sections 7 and 8, ProctorU. I think ProctorU is a fabulous way to take the exam because you're in your own environment. You can get yourself, you can have a glass of water or soda there, whatever. You can stretch out. It is your place. It's quiet. You're in control. On the other hand, it's an exam, and of course, Murphy's Law, if anything can go wrong, it will. So you want to make sure you test your equipment before the day of the exam, and also log in a little bit early. Know that once in a while, the proctor takes a little bit of time to get back to you. Depending, ProctorU, proctors all over the country, and sometimes they get a tiny bit backed up. So again, don't schedule yourself so you only have an hour. Allow yourself at least 2 hours. Know that ProctorU, there's a little bit of wiggle room in that starting time. And sometimes it takes longer to get started than you expect. And of course, exam time is going to be the time that your Wi-Fi lets you down and you've got to regroup. So just give yourself extra time. Have a plan B. I am a plan B person. I always have a plan B. So my plan on the exam is I'm taking it Tuesday because then I have a plan B for Wednesday. If you wait until 2 or 3 o'clock on Wednesday to take it, there is no plan B. Okay. Okay, no makeups on missed exams. You have 3 days to take it. Got to take it. Okay, if you are registered with the SAS office, you know who you are. If you don't know what that is, it doesn't apply to you. If you're registered with SAS, check your email. See if I've emailed you. Well, if you're registered with SAS, you should have an email from me. Read it to see if I need a response from you, okay? Because that response I needed by yesterday, but you can still do it today if you need to. Okay, now, know your My Accounting Lab login. You can log in through Blackboard, and you can go right into My Accounting Lab, and you don't have to log in to take the exam. But if you can't, you don't have to go in through Blackboard to take your exam. You can go directly into My Accounting Lab. So let's just say Blackboard goes down because other things have gone wrong. If Blackboard goes down, you can still log into My Accounting Lab. You go to, well, anyways, if Blackboard goes down and you need the URL for My Accounting Lab, it will be in the auto response to me, and you can log directly in, but make sure you know your username and password for My Accounting Lab. You have to take your exam in the location for your section. You can't switch. You can't choose. What section you chose is the exam location. Okay, so again, Practice Exam 1 does count as a quiz. The average score, your average is of all your attempts, and it can be one of your drops for the semester. You get 3 drops during the semester, and this can be one of them. Section 7 and 8 only. So this is the online section. You're taking it with ProctorU. If you have not already scheduled your exam, get online, jump online soon. I sent you an email with the schedule link. Schedule your exam, and there's no charge as long as you schedule at least 72 hours in advance. Also, make sure it doesn't hurt. I always check things 6 times, so it doesn't hurt if you're a ProctorU person to go onto your account for ProctorU and verify that you have an exam scheduled. I mean, I would do that just to make sure, do a screenshot, make sure you've got it. I mean, those are just the things I do to satisfy myself when I've got something, you know, that counts a lot. Okay. Okay, if you have trouble the day of the exam, you call ProctorU, okay? If you forgot to schedule or there doesn't seem to be an appointment for you, call them on the phone. The day of the exam, you can't use the computer for scheduling. Okay, so now, does anyone have any exam questions? Because I'm coming to the end of, I am at the end of my exam spiel for today. So any questions? Yes? Is there a time limit on the practice quiz? No, there is not. You can have it open for a few days. It doesn't, it's due, the practice exam is due, I like to say it's due before you take the exam, but reality is you can do it up until 4 p.m. on Wednesday next week. Okay. Yes, you can open it today and then do something else and come back to it tomorrow. Until you actually hit submit, it doesn't submit. And that brings me to my next question. That brought up I'm answering a question no one asked, but that reminded me of it. Let's say you're taking the practice exam or you're taking the exam, okay? And midway, your computer freezes, okay? Because this is going to happen at the worst possible minute. No worries. If your exam freezes, your computer freezes, you lose your Wi-Fi connection or whatever, not to worry. If you're online with ProctorU, you call them on the phone so they know, you're connected. But you restart your computer. Usually, if you log out of your browser and log back in, it'll work. Sometimes you have to restart your computer depending on what the issue was. But if you're in an exam or a quiz, ProctorU can log you back into the same attempt. If you're doing the practice exam, like where you are, and let's say you closed it for the night or it cut off, your Wi-Fi went out and you had to restart, just go back in to take a quiz or take an exam, and you will be back in that attempt. Your attempt is not done until the due date or until you press the submit button. So until you press the submit button, you can get back into it, or until your time runs out on the exam. Okay? So thank you for the question you didn't have. Okay? So if you have trouble on a quiz or the exam, you can get back in it during it. It doesn't use up your attempt. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to take this one. Okay. Okay, I'm reading questions where there weren't, okay. Make sure. Let me see how far back. Okay. Okay, can we use the calculator on our computer, or do we need a physical calculator to show the proctor with the online class? I'm going to answer two ways. Well, first, so for the ProctorU people, you can use the built-in calculator in My Accounting Lab. I wouldn't recommend it. I would still recommend having just a simple calculator. But you cannot use the Windows calculator. You cannot use the calculator on your computer. It would only be the one built into the exam. Can you email me to make sure I've enabled the calculator in the exam? Okay. Thank you. So ProctorU, you can use the calculator in My Accounting Lab, okay? But I would recommend that you have a simple calculator to the side. To the people who are taking it in the computer lab, they have calculators for you to use. You can also use the one built into My Accounting Lab. Okay, so there we go. Okay, you mentioned, okay, whoops. Okay, you mentioned, I'm addressing Kelsey's question now. Hold on here. Okay, you mentioned something about a sheet you were giving us to use during the exam. How do we get that? Okay, if you are in the computer lab down here, if you're in sections 1 or 2, they will have the sheet to hand to you. If you are in section 7 or 8 using ProctorU, they will push out a PDF to you. In the meantime, you could go onto Blackboard and look at the sheet so you can see what you're going to have to use during the exam. Oh, see, you already answered that one. You were cheating. Okay. Amir answered that one. Okay. So do we have to schedule an exam in the second floor computer lab of the business building? No, there are no scheduling for the people in sections 1 and 2. It's first come, first served. You go stand in line. Normally there aren't any lines on Monday and Tuesday. And the lines, if we're going to have lines, it's going to be Wednesday, starting like mid-morning maybe. So, okay. Anybody in the room have any questions? I'm just going to continue reading chat room questions. Okay. When can I start the practice exam? Anytime. It's available now. Okay. No, just online. Yes. Okay, so you're answering questions in the room for me. And our proctor will let us use the sheet, no problem. Yes. Well, thank you, Alexa. See, I should read further. Will ProctorU see that we lost our connection, or do we need to contact them when it happens? Well, hopefully you won't lose your connection during a ProctorU session. Any doubt, call them on the phone. If they're not online with you, that's a problem. I would, if it were me, I would have ProctorU's phone number beside me in case something happened and I need to call them. Rule of thumb, keep in touch with them, okay? Okay, how early can you take the exam in the computer lab? The computer lab officially opens at 9 a.m. Usually you can take it starting at 8 if you look for Angie, okay? We have to have all browsers closed right. So I can't have Spotify playing music. That is correct. Sorry, you can't have noise. ProctorU will deep fix that. So the debit credit link on Blackboard doesn't work. Doesn't? Are you nodding at me? We did it the other night. I fixed them the other night. What? You did? Okay. It should be fixed. The debit credit link on Blackboard, the debit credit. Send me an email on that one, but can you send the debit credit handout in the chat room? Amir's going to send you the debit credit handout in the chat room, and you can send me that to remind me too. Okay. Are we able to use a blank scratch sheet when we take the exam online? Absolutely. You will hold your blank scratch paper up to show ProctorU it's blank, and yes, you will be able to use it. Okay, any other questions in person? Yes? You are not allowed to take the debit credit sheet to the exam, but we provide the note sheet for you. The note sheet has the debit credit handout on it, but it has more than that on it. So I included that plus some stuff. Okay, anyone else? Okay, and you know I am only an email away Okay, and Amir just put in the exam sheet. So the person, Alexa, asking for the debit credit link, the debit credit handout is on the exam sheet. That's the first page of the exam sheet, so you can just go with that. Okay, so no other questions? I can guarantee, it's 8:15, I can guarantee we're not going to get through all the homework problems today, and that's fine, I didn't plan to. But later this afternoon, I will be emailing out some of the homework, some step-by-step links for homework problems. If we don't get it through it in class today, I will email those out, so no worries. Okay, so anything else? Okay, well then we'll get started on the material for today. I've got 9 people who are logged into Learning Catalytics and have not yet answered the question. You have about 15 seconds to get it answered now because we've been in class for half an hour. So, homework is due this Saturday. The practice exam quiz is due Wednesday by 4. Take the practice exam before you take the exam. It's not due till Wednesday, but you want to take it before you take the exam. Okay, so we're going to start. We're going to start with the homework problem, exercise 3-7. Just to put it in context, we're doing some adjusting journal entries. So we're going to do a slew of adjusting journal entries, and then we'll have we'll do an adjusted trial balance and closing entries. So we're going to do some of these, and then I'll put out links for the ones we don't get through. So on short exercise 3-7, we have two situations. We're going to do 2 adjusting entries. The first situation is on October 1st, Paradise Travel prepaid $6,000 for 6 months rent. Give the adjusting entry to record rent expense, include the date of the entry, and post all amounts. Okay, so on October 1st, we prepaid $6,000 for 6 months rent, okay? So we're basically paying $1,000 every month. We're paying it ahead of time. So on October 1st, we have a prepaid asset, prepaid rent. So now we come to the end of October, and we want to issue a financial statement. So we have a prepaid rent account to start with at $6,000, but a month has gone by, so we've used a month up. So what we're going to do is we're going to, at the end of October, recognize that we've used a month of rent. So we're going to debit rent expense, and we're going to credit prepaid rent. And it's for the 1 month's worth of rent. So what we've just done here is we've reduced our asset. So we have prepaid rent that we started with $6,000 was our beginning balance. And we had $1,000 that we have $1,000 that we debited rent expense, and we credited the prepaid asset called prepaid rent. So then at the end of October, we only have 5 months of rent left. So we have 5 times the $1,000. We have 5 months of rent left in the asset, and we have rent expense for a month. So we've had a month. We've used up $1,000 of rent. So what we should see is $1,000 of rent expense, and then we still have, and yes, all the content that we cover today is on the exam. Everything through the homework on Saturday, chapters 1, 2, and 3 in their entirety are on the exam. Okay, so that is the first journal entry, the first adjusting journal entry. The second one is a little bit different. In this first one, we used up, time went by, and we knew it was $1,000 every month. In the second situation, on October 1st, we paid $950 for supplies. So we bought supplies of $950. And at the end of the month, they counted, and they have supplies of $270. So what happens here with supplies is we buy our supplies. We bought $950 worth of supplies. Now people are going to come to the supply cabinet or wherever it is, and they're going to use pens, they're going to use paper in the copy machine, they're going to take notebooks, they're going to take invoice books or whatever is in there. They're not going to, every time we use a pen or every time we take out a ream of paper, we're not writing a journal entry for supplies expense. What happens with supplies is we start with, in this case, we have $950 that we bought, and then at the end of the month, someone's going to go to the supply cabinet and count what we have left and take an inventory. So it says we have $270 left. So we had $950, we only have $270 left, so that means we had to have used the difference there, and that's what we do with supplies. So supplies, we're going to take the difference between what we started with. Sometimes we even have a beginning balance, but we could take a beginning balance, add what we purchased, and subtract what's left. That will tell us how much we used. So I'm going to debit supplies expense and credit supplies. Supplies is an asset. It's a current asset. That $950 minus $270 is not part of the journal entry. I'm just showing you the calculation there. Okay? So this is the supplies journal entry. And then if we put those in T accounts, we're going to have supplies, the asset, have a beginning balance on October 1st of $950. The ending balance we know is $270 because we did a count, so then we know we need a credit. We can back into it that way. But we would post our journal entry and we would come up with an ending balance agreeing with that inventory that we took, the physical count that we took. Okay, so those were examples of the deferrals, where the cash changed hands and now we're adjusting after the fact. So next up, the next kind of adjusting entry. There's three kinds of adjusting entries: deferrals, depreciation, and accruals. So the next one up is depreciation. Depreciation, we are only going to do briefly. We are only going to talk about it very briefly. Chapter 9, we will get more into depreciation. Depreciation is basically taking the cost of a long-lived asset. So taking the cost of this asset and spreading it over the life of that asset. So if we buy a building, and we spend $1 million for it, and that building we expect to use for 30 years, we spread the $1 million over the 30 years. We don't deduct the $1 million today or on this year's income statement. So depreciation is this process of spreading the cost of an asset over its life. It's for assets that have that have longer lives than a year. We are using, for those of you who want to know, you'll see these terms, we're using straight line depreciation in this chapter only. It's just saying that every month depreciation will be the same. We're basically going to take how much we're going to depreciate, divide by the life, and take that same amount every time. When we get to chapter 9, we'll see that it's not always that case in real life. Okay, so next up, still in this idea of depreciation. So every year when we take depreciation expense on an asset, we don't reduce the asset. We have an account called accumulated depreciation. And this is a new kind of account for us. It always sticks with the asset account. It's called a contra asset. Okay, so accumulated depreciation is a contra asset. And it has a normal credit balance. It is always shown with its asset. So it's always shown, if it's equipment, if it's accumulated depreciation on equipment, you will see equipment and you will see accumulated depreciation with it. So it always is shown on the balance sheet, it's always shown with its asset, and it offsets the asset. So all the depreciation today goes in accumulated depreciation. When we talk about the book value of an asset, it is the original cost minus the accumulated depreciation. And we're not going to go a lot further into depreciation than that. We'll go a lot further in Chapter 9, but when we're going to do a problem coming up here. But you will always be given the life of an asset. It'll tell you, and we'll see. We're going to go into it now. So what we're going to do is we're going to do short exercise 3-8, and it says, suppose on January 1st, a company paid cash of $35,000 for equipment. So they paid $35,000 for equipment that is expected to last 5 years. And it says at the end of 5 years, the equipment will be worth 0. So it'll be worthless. So 5 years, $35,000. So under straight line depreciation, just to give you a clue what we're doing here, $35,000, worth 0 at the end. We can take the $35,000, divide basically by 5 years, and say we're going to take $7,000 of depreciation every year, and that's what we're doing here. So it says A, to record the purchase of the equipment, and then B, do the annual depreciation. So the journal entry to record the purchase of equipment. So we buy this equipment. So we're going to have an asset now called equipment, and we're going to have we're going to pay cash for it. So we're going to see assets increasing, $35,000, and we're going to decrease cash for $35,000 as well. So that's the initial purchase of the equipment. That is not an adjusting entry. That is simply done to show where you started with this. Okay, so that was the initial purchase. Next up, we're going to do the annual depreciation. And the annual depreciation on this, we said $35,000, we're told a 5-year life. So $7,000 a year depreciation. So we're going to debit depreciation expense on the equipment, and we're going to credit accumulated depreciation. Accumulated depreciation is a running total of all the depreciation that we've taken to date. So every time we take depreciation each year, it goes in accumulated depreciation. Depreciation expense starts over each year at 0. So accumulated depreciation is this running total of all our depreciation to date. It reduces the book value of the equipment, and we'll get to the book value in Part 3. Okay, so we purchased the asset in Part A. We have an asset for $35,000. We have a credit to cash. In Part B, on December 31st, we're recognizing depreciation. We're taking that $35,000, dividing it over 5 years. So this is the first year. We're going to have depreciation expense for $7,000, and then we're going to put it in accumulated depreciation. So what we do next, we have these 2 journal entries. Okay, we're going to post to the account. So what we did here is we posted all those journal entries. So the first one, I guess I don't have cash up here. Equipment, we have a balance of $35,000. Once we buy something, the purchase price of the equipment goes into equipment. We do not put depreciation in equipment. Instead, the depreciation gets put in accumulated depreciation. The expense goes into depreciation expense. We're going to see coming up here that at the end of every year, after everything's done, after the financial statements are prepared, we close our expense accounts and we start over at 0 for the expense accounts. Accumulated depreciation has a running total balance. So every year for this equipment, we're going to see depreciation expense of $7,000. Every year, accumulated depreciation is going to increase by $7,000. So after 1 more year, we'll have another $7,000 of depreciation expense next year. But accumulated depreciation next year will be $14,000. So it just keeps growing over time. Okay, so the equipment's book value. Book value is the original cost less the accumulated depreciation. So the book value is $35,000 minus the accumulated depreciation of $7,000 gives us a book value of $28,000. Okay, again, accumulated depreciation is a contra asset, meaning it works exactly opposite of an asset. The contra asset part says it's backwards, so it offsets the asset. We don't put the depreciation directly in the asset account. We have this other account that reduces it, and that's why the asset is always shown with the accumulated depreciation. Okay, we're going to do a question next. This question coming up relates to revenue recognition, and we did this on Monday. On revenue recognition, the rule for revenue recognition, remember, just a refresher, is we recognize revenue when the services are performed or the goods are delivered. Okay? So we recognize revenue, and it makes a difference. Which year does it go in? It goes when you actually perform the service or deliver the goods. So we're going to do the question. This question, all you're doing is sorting out the dates, and so you're searching for which date you would record revenue. So I'm going to be quiet for about a minute, let you answer that, and then we'll go on. Okay, on this one, remember the rule is that revenue is recorded when you perform the service. So as you read this, on December 15th, a company receives an order from a customer for services to be performed on December 28th. Okay, so December 15th, we receive an order. The revenue recognition rule, again, is you recognize the revenue only when you actually perform the service. I'm giving you the answer for this one as we talk through it, so you do want to check your answer. I've got 20 people left to answer. Again, you only recognize revenue when you perform the service. So on December 15th, the company receives an order from a customer for services to be performed on December 28th. Okay, so we know it's not December, it cannot be December 15th because they receive an order. Receiving an order doesn't earn you any income. It's simply you received an order. Now, we can plan to do this December 28th, okay? It's saying that they're planning to do it, but due to a backlog of orders, the company doesn't perform the service. Okay, so they can plan whatever they want. They still don't recognize the revenue if they didn't do it. So December 28th is not the date either, because they can plan whatever they want. They cannot recognize revenue if they didn't do the job then. The customer pays for the services on January 6th. When a customer pays has zero impact on revenue recognition. Okay, so it can't be January 6th either. Okay, so I'm going to close this in about 10 seconds. I've now eliminated 3 answers for you out of 4. Okay. Okay, so on that one, as I said, it can't be December 15th, it can't be December 28th, it can't be January 6th. So the answer is actually January 3rd. It's when you actually perform the services, when revenue is recognized. Okay, next type of entry. So we've done deferrals, we've done some examples of deferrals, we've done an example of depreciation. Now we're going to do an example of an accrued expense. An accrued expense means the expense has been incurred, but we haven't paid for it yet. So we need to acknowledge that we have the expense and we have a liability because we haven't paid yet. It's recorded at the end of the period using an adjusting entry. Examples of accruals would be salaries. Oftentimes our payroll lags a week or two afterwards. So we have salaries payable, salaries expense, interest expense, taxes payable. You know, you owe your taxes for last year, but you don't pay them. Corporations don't pay them till, if they're in a calendar year, till March 15th. So they owe the taxes at year end, but they're not paying them for 3 months. That's fine. That's an accrual entry. Sometimes rent can be paid before incurred. You can pay it after you've actually rented for the month. You can pay it after. Rent can be paid in advance, or it can be paid after the month is over. We also have, we're going to have another question coming up here. What slide is that? Yeah, that one. These old eyes. Oops, wrong one. That's not where I want to be. Okay, that's where I want to be. Easy question. What type of account is unearned revenue? Question is out for you to answer. Okay, what type of account is unearned revenue? Again, the debit credit sheet from the other day. Okay, that's good to have in class any given day. What type of account is unearned revenue? Okay. Unearned revenue, I'm going to close this question in 10 seconds, but unearned revenue is a liability, okay? Unearned revenue is a liability because it says that we've received money in advance for something that we still need to, goods we need to deliver or services we still need to perform. Okay. Oops. Okay, so now we have several types of accruals we do, and if you have the PowerPoint notes, there's several examples that they go through that are good to have, but we're going to skip to adjusting the accounts. I want to hit all the high points in the process, and then you have those example accrual entries. Okay, adjusting the accounts, the adjusted trial balance. So we've gone through, we've done all our deferral adjusting entries, all our depreciation adjusting entries, and all our accrual adjusting entries. They're all just referred to as adjusting entries. So what happens is we do an adjusted trial balance. So we start with the trial balance. We do a trial balance at the end of the period, and that's to make sure our debits equal our credits. Then our next step is to do all our adjusting entries, and we post those to a worksheet, and then we come up with final trial balance numbers, which are called our adjusted trial balance. We're not going to do this question. Okay, so what I'm talking about here is a trial balance worksheet. At the end of the period in these columns B and C, this is Exhibit 3-9 in your book. B and C, what we do is we prepare a trial balance. We make sure the debits equal the credits. Then the next step is to prepare our adjusting entries. So what we've done in this chapter so far, we do all the adjusting entries. And then our final step is to say, okay, here's our adjusted trial balance, and we use this adjusted trial balance to prepare our financial statements. So there's a trial balance, there's adjusting entries, and then there's an adjusted trial balance, and the adjusted trial balance is what we use to prepare our financial statements. So we prepare our financial statements, we prepare our income statement, our balance sheet, and then after all that, we publish our financial statements, and then we need to do this final step, which is called closing the books. So we are, if you're following along in the notes, we are skipping ahead again, and okay, so we're to the final step, which is called closing the books. So we've issued the financial statements for the year, and what we need to do now is we close the books. And closing the books says that we're going to reset some accounts to zero, not everything. At the end of the semester, when you get a grade point, you get your grade point for the semester. So you'll have your fall semester, let's say spring. Spring semester 2015, you had a GPA, and you had an overall GPA. But then when you started fall semester, your current GPA is reset to nothing, right? Because then you have your cumulative GPA, which is your permanent GPA. So every semester that gets adjusted, but every semester you start with a fresh semester GPA. We do the same thing for our financial statements. There are certain accounts that continue. Cash, for example. End of year, we're going to start next year with the same balance of cash that we ended with. Cash is referred to as a permanent account. Accounts payable, loans payable, equipment, all those accounts, assets and liabilities are permanent accounts. Common stock is a permanent account. We don't close it. Retained earnings is a permanent account. We don't close it. But what we do close at the end of the year is we have to somehow set our sales, for example, back to zero. Because we talk about our sales for the year, the next year, we talk about next year's sales. We don't talk about the sales from the beginning of time. We're talking about just each year. Sales is referred to as a temporary account because it gets closed every year, reset to zero. Expenses are a temporary account. Revenues, expenses, and dividends are all temporary accounts, and that's what we're going to talk about now is closing the books. We close revenues, expenses, and dividends, and how you can remember what type of accounts these are is you can remember the acronym RED, okay? So you're going to close you're going to close the revenues that begin with R, the expenses that begin with E, and you're going to close dividends. These accounts, revenues, expenses, and dividends, are known as temporary accounts. Revenues, expenses, dividends, RED, temporary accounts. The permanent accounts are assets, liabilities, and equity. So what we're doing is we're going to close revenues. So revenues have a normal credit balance. To close them, we're going to debit them. Expenses have a normal debit balance. To close them, we're going to credit them. What we're trying to do is get the accounts to zero, the temporary accounts, because we're going to start a fresh year. When we talk about salaries expense for this year, we're only talking about this year. We're not talking about from the beginning of time. So we have to reset these temporary accounts. Okay, so I'm going to use this example that's in the notes to show you closing entries. So what we've got here is we've got selected accounts. They didn't give us all their accounts, but we have to do the closing entries. So it tells us we have cost of services sold, which is an expense account. We have accumulated depreciation, selling general administrative expenses, retained earnings, service revenue, depreciation expense, interest revenue, dividends, income tax expense, and accounts payable. So we're given all these accounts. We assume that their balances are their normal balance. Remember, normal balance is whatever increases an account. So what we're going to do is we are going to close the revenue accounts first. So up in the upper right-hand corner, I've written what we're doing here so we are right now closing revenue accounts. So we're closing revenue accounts. So what we're going to do is look through the list for all our revenue accounts. And our revenue accounts are going to be service revenue and interest revenue. Service revenue is up in the top right-hand side of the column. Service revenue, $63,800. Interest revenue, $800. And then I'm going to take those, I'm debiting them because I do the opposite of what increases them. I'm wiping them out. After I do this, service revenue will have a zero balance. Interest revenue will have a zero balance, and I put the total in retained earnings. Every closing entry closes the accounts and retained earnings. When we have a closing entry, retained earnings has to be in the closing entry. Retained earnings is getting all these accounts, these temporary accounts, get closed into retained earnings. Remember, retained earnings is a running total of all your net income to date, less any dividends you've paid. Net income to date is revenues minus expenses. So that's what we're doing with closing entries. We're putting all our revenue for the year into retained earnings. We're going to put all our expenses for the year in retained earnings, and we're going to put all our dividends for the year in retained earnings. So this is the first closing entry. So closing entries, revenues, we will always debit. Okay, remember on your debit credit sheet, which is also on your exam info sheet, you have a column for what increases an account and what decreases an account. For closing entries, you're reducing those accounts. So I'm going to close revenues. Revenues to decrease revenues, I debit it, so I'm debiting my revenues, and I'm going to close it to retained earnings. Retained earnings is always in every closing entry. It's the opposite. It's whatever you did, the opposite of what you did. So that was revenues. Okay, next one. Our next thing that we're doing is closing expenses. Closing entries are revenues, expenses, and dividends. So our next one, we're going to pick out the expense account. So expenses, to increase them, we debit them. So closing, we're going to credit them. So looking through the table for expenses, I see circle them. I see cost of services sold, which is an expense. Again, using the debit credit handout helps you figure out what's an expense, the types of accounts. Accumulated depreciation is a contra asset, so it doesn't get closed. I see selling general administrative expenses, that's an expense. I see depreciation expense, and I see income tax expense. Okay, so I see those four accounts are expenses. I need to close them. So to close an expense, to reduce it, I credit it. So I'm going to credit each one of those accounts. I'm going to debit retained earnings for the total. So what my entry is going to look like is I'm going to credit all four of those accounts that I circled. The total, I add the four accounts up. If I add the cost of services sold, selling expense, depreciation expense, and income tax expense, I'm going to get $50,800, and that's going to be my debit to retained earnings. Retained earnings gets all the sales revenue, gets all the expenses, and then it'll get the dividends in the next step. So closing entries are the opposite of what increases an account. Close all the revenues, all the expenses, and the dividends. Retained earnings are running total of your net income to date less any dividends paid. So we're just trying to set these accounts back to zero, so next year our sales revenue refers to sales revenue in that year. So that's our expense closing entry. Our dividend closing entry, what we're going to do there, again, we look at the debit credit handout or the exam info handout. The exam info sheet has the debit credit handout on the first sheet. With dividends, whatever decreases a dividend is what we're going to do to it here. So to decrease dividends, we would credit it. So we're going to debit retained earnings and credit dividends. So closing entries are whatever decreases those temporary accounts. Temporary accounts are going to be your revenues, expenses, and dividends. That red acronym, revenues, expenses, dividends, will tell you what you need to do. Now, okay. There's one more question we can answer with this example. The next question we can answer is how much income did they earn? So if we go back to those 3 closing entries, I want to point out 3 numbers to you here. Retained earnings was credited $60,600 for revenues. Okay, so hold that. $60,600 retained earnings was credited. The expenses came to $50,800. So the expenses were $50,800. So when we're answering the question of what was our net income, our total revenues were the total of the closing entry for revenues. Our total expenses were the total of, I'm off kilter there. Okay, our total expenses are $50,800. I'll fix that. Not sure how that happened. Okay, and then net income is $13,800. Remember, dividends are never deducted when getting net income. Okay, so on this one, which of the following accounts will be closed at the end of a period? So what you've got to do, and remember, you have the debit credit handout on the exam info sheet, so you would be able to answer a question like this. You first of all, remember your RED acronym. Revenues, expenses, and dividends are closed. So you're looking for something in that list that that's a revenue, an expense, or a dividend. We haven't started yet. If you want to wait for a few minutes. Okay, so again, we're going to close accounts that are revenues, expenses, and dividends. So you need to identify the account in that list that's a revenue, an expense, or a dividend. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to leave this question open for a minute. So get your answer in. But now we're coming to the last couple minutes. Now, do we have any questions before we end? I'm going to put out some videos tonight, short videos, on some of the things that we did quicker than others, and so you can use that for doing your homework. Any questions about anything? Yes? What time does the exam open on Monday? Officially, it opens at 9 a.m. I think I have it set to open at 8 a.m., and the proctor lab will, traditionally no one takes it at 8 a.m. Monday morning, but it'll be open, and if you look for Angie down the hall, they sometimes will let you start early. But 9 a.m. is the official for sure time. Yes? Do we have class on Monday? No, we do not have class next week at all, because your job is to take the exam. Any other questions? Didn't hear me say what? No, I've not answered. Well, I essentially did. I told you find the item. Okay, we don't have to take it in the computer lab, right? The exam, if you're in sections 1 or 2, you have to take the exam in the computer lab. If you're in section 7 or 8, you have to take the exam on ProctorU. I'll follow up with an announcement in the next couple days, just reinforcing which location you're in. So don't ignore my emails. But it's not a choice. You go with your section, okay? Okay, I'm going to close this question. Oops. Okay. The answer to this question is wages expense, and you close all revenues, expenses, and dividends. Accounts receivable is an asset. Accounts payable is a liability. Common stock is an equity account. So we're left with the only expense. You only close revenues, expenses, and dividends. Okay, do not hesitate to email me. If I email you back a short response, it just could be I have a lot of emails to answer. I will try to be chatty Cathy, but sometimes I can't be. So have a good weekend, study a lot, and I will see you in a week.